When the construction worker's shovel struck something metallic in the Arizona desert, he expected to find a pipe or buried cable. What he pulled from the earth was a wedding ring engraved with a date that shouldn't exist, because the couple who owned it had vanished 11 years ago from this exact spot, and according to every official record, they were never here. The ring was just the beginning, because when investigators ran the serial number on Harold Chen's pacemaker, the one they found buried next to the ring, they discovered it was still transmitting data, 11 years after Harold had vanished, which meant either the impossible had happened, or someone had been keeping Harold Chen alive all this time. The Arizona sun was merciless that Tuesday morning in September 2024, beating down on the construction crew as they prepared to break ground on what would become Phoenix's newest shopping complex. Jake Martinez had been working construction for 15 years, and he knew the rhythm of the desert, the way the heat shimmered off the hard pan, the particular silence that settled over the landscape when even the wind seemed too tired to blow. He was operating the small excavator, clearing topsoil for the foundation, when the machine's bucket struck something that rang like a bell. The sound was wrong. Too metallic, too deliberate for the random debris you'd expect to find in undeveloped desert land. Jake shut off the engine and climbed down to investigate. The desert floor here was hard-packed caliche, the kind of ground that required serious equipment to penetrate. But as he knelt beside the shallow scrape his excavator had made, he could see that someone had been here before. The earth was different here, softer, darker, recently disturbed despite being covered with years of wind-blown sand. He reached into the depression and his fingers closed around something small and cold. When he pulled it free and brushed away the dirt, his breath caught in his throat. It was a wedding ring, gold, simple, elegant, with an inscription that read, "Forever yours, H," and the date June 15th, 1980. Jake had found enough lost items over the years to know the protocol. Document the location, call it in, let someone else deal with the paperwork. But something about this ring nagged at him. The metal was too clean, too bright for something that had been buried in the desert for any length of time, and the way the earth had given it up so easily, as if it had been placed there recently. He was photographing the site with his phone when his metal detector, a hobby tool he kept in his truck for lunch breaks, began going crazy. Not just the single ping you'd expect from a lost ring, but a sustained, frantic beeping that indicated multiple metallic objects in a concentrated area. The first sweep revealed something larger buried just inches away from where he'd found the ring. This time, Jake used his hands to carefully excavate the object. What he pulled from the earth made his blood run cold. It was a pacemaker, still sealed in its titanium casing, connected to leads that disappeared deeper into the soil. The device bore a serial number that was clearly visible, PM 47829HC. Jake stared at the medical device in his dirt-stained hands, his mind racing. Pacemakers weren't something you just lost. They were surgically implanted, removed only at death or during replacement surgery, and this one looked far too modern, too pristine, to have been buried for very long. "Hey, Martinez!" The voice of his foreman, Tony Castellanos, cut through the desert stillness. "What's the holdup over there?" Jake quickly pocketed both items and waved Tony over. "Found something weird, boss. Might want to take a look." Tony was a pragmatic man who'd seen everything the desert could throw at a construction project. Rattlesnakes, flash flood damage, even the occasional prehistoric artifact that required archaeologists and months of delays. But when Jake showed him the ring and the pacemaker, Tony's weathered face went pale. "Jesus Christ, Jake, you think there's a body down there?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy as the desert heat. Jake looked back at the disturbed earth, noting details he'd missed before. The way the soil color changed in a rough oval shape, approximately 6 feet long. The way the ground felt slightly spongy underfoot, as if it had been excavated and refilled. "I think we need to call the cops," Jake said quietly. Tony nodded, already reaching for his phone. "And I think we need to shut down this section of the site." The Maricopa County Sheriff's Department arrived within the hour, led by Detective Maria Santos, a compact woman with graying hair and the tired eyes of someone who'd seen too much in her 20-year career. She listened to Jake's account with professional attention, taking notes and photographing the items he'd found. "You did the right thing calling this in," she told him, pulling on latex gloves before examining the pacemaker more closely. "These devices have serial numbers that can be traced back to the patient. We'll know who this belonged to within hours." What Detective Santos didn't tell Jake was that something about this case was already bothering her. The location, the condition of the items, the way the burial site had been so carefully concealed yet so easily discovered, it all felt too convenient, too staged. She made the call to the medical examiner's office while Jake and Tony watched from a safe distance, their morning's work forgotten. Within 2 hours, the construction site had been transformed into a crime scene, yellow tape fluttering in the desert breeze like prayer flags marking sacred ground. The preliminary investigation revealed more than Detective Santos had expected. Ground-penetrating radar showed clear evidence of a burial site, but also something else. Anomalous readings that suggested the presence of modern electronics buried alongside human remains. "That's impossible," the radar technician told her, staring at his equipment readout. "Electronics don't survive burial, especially not in this climate. The moisture, the mineral content of the soil, anything electronic should have been corroded beyond recognition years ago." But when they carefully excavated the site that afternoon, they found exactly what the radar had suggested. Not just Harold Chen's pacemaker, but a small electronic device that had been carefully sealed in waterproof casing. It looked like a GPS tracker, the kind used for monitoring elderly patients with dementia. Detective Santos stared at the device, her mind racing. If this was a GPS tracker, it might still contain data. And if it contained data, it might tell them exactly how Harold Chen had ended up buried in the Arizona desert, 11 years after vanishing from an RV park that was supposedly 50 miles away. The discovery was about to turn everything they thought they knew about missing persons cases in Arizona completely upside down. Because when they powered up that GPS tracker in the lab, they would discover that Harold Chen's last recorded location wasn't the Desert Winds RV park where he'd supposedly vanished. It was right here, at this construction site, on a date that according to every official record should have been impossible. The forensics lab at the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office had seen its share of impossible evidence over the years, but the GPS tracker that Detective Santos delivered that evening would challenge everything they thought they understood about electronic devices and time. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the department's digital forensics specialist, connected the waterproof device to her computer with the same routine efficiency she'd applied to thousands of similar cases. She expected to find either corrupted data or nothing at all. What she found instead made her call Detective Santos at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night. "Maria, You need to get down here right now." Elena's voice was tight with disbelief. "This device, it's impossible, but it's still active. It's been transmitting location data continuously for the past 11 years. Detective Santos arrived at the lab within 20 minutes, still wearing the clothes she'd fallen asleep in on her couch. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Elena pulled up the GPS data on her computer screen. "Look at this." Elena pointed to a map display showing a single red dot. "This is Harold Chen's last known location according to his GPS tracker. It's not the Desert Winds RV park. It's the exact coordinates where Jake Martinez found the ring today." Detective Santos stared at the screen, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. According to the GPS data, Harold Chen had arrived at the construction site coordinates on October 15, 2013, the same day he and his wife Margaret had reportedly vanished from their RV park 50 miles away. "That's not possible," Santos murmured, but Elena was already pulling up more data. "It gets worse," Elena continued, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "Look at the transmission pattern. The device shows Harold arriving at these coordinates at 3:42 a.m. on October 15, 2013. But here's the thing. His daughter Sarah reported her parents missing from the RV park at 8 o'clock a.m. that same morning. She said their RV was still there, but her parents were gone." The timeline made no sense. How could Harold Chen be buried at a construction site at 3:42 a.m., while his RV remained at Desert Winds RV Park just hours later? Either the technology was lying, or something far more sinister had happened that October night. But Elena wasn't finished. "There's more, Maria. The pacemaker data. I was able to access the stored diagnostics remotely. These modern devices keep detailed logs of heart activity, medication schedules, even sleep patterns." She pulled up another screen, this one showing medical data in neat columns and graphs. According to the pacemaker's records, Harold Chen's heart was beating normally until 3:47 a.m. on October 15, 2013. Then, nothing. Complete cardiac arrest. But here's the impossible part. The pacemaker tried to restart his heart 14 times over the course of 6 minutes, and on the 15th attempt. Elena paused, her face pale in the blue glow of the computer screen. It worked. Harold Chen's heart started beating again, and according to this data, it kept beating for another 8 years. Detective Santos knew she needed to speak with Sarah Chen, Harold and Margaret's daughter, but first, she needed to understand exactly what she was dealing with. The evidence suggested something that defied both medical science and physics, that Harold Chen had died and been resuscitated, then lived for 8 more years while buried in the Arizona desert. She called Sarah Chen at 6:30 a.m., early enough to catch her before work, but late enough to avoid seeming like an emergency call. "Ms. Chen? This is Detective Santos with the Maricopa County Sheriff's Department. I'm calling about your parents' case." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds. When Sarah finally spoke, her voice was carefully controlled, like someone who had learned not to hope too much. "Did you find them?" "We found some evidence that we'd like to discuss with you. Would it be possible for you to come to our office today?" Another pause. "Evidence? What kind of evidence? Are they alive?" Detective Santos chose her words carefully. "We found items that belong to your father. I'd prefer to discuss the details in person if possible." Sarah Chen arrived at the sheriff's office 3 hours later, having driven from Tucson where she worked as a software engineer for a medical device company. She was a precise woman in her early 40s, with her father's careful attention to detail and her mother's warm eyes. But those eyes were shadowed with 11 years of unanswered questions. Detective Santos led her to a conference room where Elena had prepared a careful presentation of their findings. They started with the basics: the wedding ring, the location where it had been found, the construction site. "I don't understand," Sarah said, studying the photographs. "My parents never went to that part of Phoenix. They always stayed at Desert Winds when they visited Arizona. They had the same spot every year, site number 47. "Can you tell me about the last time you saw them?" Santos asked gently. Sarah's account matched the original missing persons report exactly. She had visited her parents at the RV park on October 14th, 2013. They had seemed happy, healthy, excited about their planned visit to the Heard Museum the following day. When she called them the next morning to confirm their lunch plans, there was no answer. She had driven to the park and found their RV locked and empty, but with no signs of a struggle. "The park manager said they must have gone for an early morning walk," Sarah continued. "But my father had a strict medication schedule because of his heart condition. He never went anywhere without telling me, especially not early in the morning when he needed to take his pills." Detective Santos exchanged a glance with Elena. They had found Harold's pill organizer among his effects, still containing his medications for October 15th, 2013. "Sarah, I need to ask you about your father's pacemaker," Detective Santos said carefully. "Do you remember the model or when it was installed?" "He got it replaced just 6 months before they disappeared," Sarah replied. "It was one of those new ones that could be monitored remotely. His cardiologist could check his heart rhythm from his office. Dad was really excited about the technology. He said it made him feel safer when they traveled." Elena leaned forward. "The remote monitoring. Did anyone ever access that data after your parents disappeared?" Sarah nodded. "The police checked with Dr. Williamson, Dad's cardiologist. The pacemaker stopped transmitting data on October 15th. Everyone assumed it meant, well, that Dad had died." "Sarah," Detective Santos said slowly, "we've been able to access your father's pacemaker data. What we found is unusual. The device recorded cardiac arrest on October 15th at 3:47 a.m., but then it recorded 8 more years of normal heart activity." The color drained from Sarah's face. "That's impossible. You're saying my father's heart was beating for 8 years after he disappeared? Where was he? Why didn't he contact me?" Before Detective Santos could attempt to answer Sarah's questions, Elena presented the next piece of evidence: Margaret Chen's wedding ring, which had been found just inches from Harold's. "We found your mother's ring as well," Elena said gently, showing Sarah the photographs. "But here's what's strange. According to our analysis, your mother's ring was buried approximately 3 years after your father's." Sarah stared at the image of her mother's ring, her hands trembling slightly. 3 years later? But they disappeared together. They were always together. "The soil analysis shows distinct layers," Elena explained. "Your father's items were buried deeper, in soil that matches the 2013 time frame, but your mother's ring was in a different soil layer, one that corresponds to approximately 2016. The implication hung heavy in the air. If the evidence was correct, Margaret Chen had survived her husband's death by 3 years. But where had she been, and why had she ended up buried in the same impossible location? "There's something else," Detective Santos added. "We found Margaret's GPS tracker as well, and it tells a very different story than your father's." Sarah looked up, her eyes wide with a mixture of hope and terror. What kind of story? According to the data, your mother didn't die in 2016. Her GPS tracker shows movement patterns consistent with someone who was alive and mobile until just 8 months ago. The revelation that Margaret Chen might have been alive until 2024, a full decade after her reported disappearance, opened up possibilities that Sarah had never allowed herself to consider. But it also raised the most terrifying question of all. If her mother had been alive for 10 years after disappearing, why had she never tried to come home? Detective Santos opened Margaret Chen's GPS file on the computer screen, and what she saw made her question everything she thought she knew about missing persons cases. Unlike Harold's static location data, Margaret's tracker showed a pattern of movement that painted a picture of a woman who had been very much alive and very much a prisoner. Look at this movement pattern. Elena pointed to the screen. For the first 3 years after Harold's death, Margaret's tracker shows she was confined to a very small area, maybe a house or a compound. The GPS coordinates never vary by more than a few hundred feet. Sarah leaned forward, studying the data with the analytical mind of a software engineer. That's not normal movement. Even if someone was housebound, you'd see more variation. This looks like she was being kept somewhere against her will. It gets stranger, Detective Santos continued. Starting in 2016, the movement pattern changes dramatically. Look at these coordinates. The screen showed a series of dots forming a trail across Arizona, Nevada, and New Mexico. But it wasn't the random pattern of a traveler or someone exploring the Southwest. It was methodical, purposeful, like someone following a specific route over and over again. She was visiting places, Elena observed. The same locations, in the same order, every few months for 8 years. One location appeared on Margaret's GPS data more frequently than any other. Desert Winds RV Park, the place where she and Harold had supposedly vanished. According to the tracker, Margaret had returned to the park every 3 months like clockwork, staying for exactly 48 hours before moving on. She kept going back, Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. All those times I visited that park, looking for answers, hoping for some sign of them. She was there. She was actually there. Detective Santos felt a chill run down her spine. Sarah, when did you visit the park? Every year on the anniversary of their disappearance, October 15th, I'd stay at their old site, number 47, and just wait, hoping maybe they'd come back. Elena pulled up the GPS data for October 15th of each year from 2014 to 2023. Margaret Chen's tracker showed she had been at Desert Winds RV Park on every single one of those dates. She was watching you, Elena said quietly. Every year she was there when you came looking for her. The realization hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her mother had been alive, had been close enough to reach out, to make contact, to end 11 years of agonizing uncertainty. But she had chosen to remain hidden. Detective Santos knew her next step had to be Desert Winds RV Park. If Margaret Chen had been visiting regularly for 8 years, someone had to have seen her. The park wasn't large, maybe 50 sites total, and the tight-knit community of regulars would notice a familiar face. She and Sarah drove to the park that afternoon, the desert landscape blurring past the windows as they traveled the same route Harold and Margaret had taken on their final trip 11 years ago. Desert Winds RV Park looked exactly as Sarah remembered it, a small oasis of green grass and palm trees surrounded by endless desert scrub. The manager's office was a single-wide trailer with sun-faded awnings and a sign that read, "Welcome Home." Frank Morrison had been managing Desert Winds for 15 years. He was a weathered man in his 60s who knew every regular visitor by name and remembered every unusual incident. When Detective Santos showed him Margaret Chen's photograph, his reaction was immediate. "Maggie! Yeah, I know Maggie. Quiet lady, always paid cash, never caused any trouble. Haven't seen her in, maybe 8 months now. I wondered what happened to her." Sarah's legs nearly gave out. "You knew my mother? You knew she was alive?" Frank looked confused. "Your mother? But Maggie said her daughter lived back east. Never visited. She always seemed so sad about it. Said her daughter was too busy with her career to stay in touch." The story Frank told painted a picture of Margaret Chen that Sarah barely recognized. For 8 years, her mother had been visiting Desert Winds under a different name, Maggie Williams. She always stayed in Site 23, always arrived alone in a small white sedan, always kept to herself. "She was different from when she used to come with Harold," Frank explained. "Nervous, always looking over her shoulder. Sometimes I'd see her just sitting in her lawn chair, staring at Site 47 where you folks used to stay. Made me wonder if she was remembering something." Detective Santos pressed for more details. "Did she ever mention being held against her will? Or being afraid of someone?" Frank shook his head. "No, but there was something off about her. She never got mail, never gave an emergency contact. Paid for everything in cash, even though most folks use cards these days. And sometimes, when I'd try to make conversation, she'd get this look in her eyes like she wanted to tell me something but couldn't." "Did anyone ever visit her? Any calls?" "That's the strange part," Frank continued. "Every few months she'd get this phone call. I know because I'd see her answer her cell phone and her whole body language would change. She'd go from relaxed to terrified in seconds. After those calls, she'd pack up and leave within the hour." Detective Santos requested Margaret's phone records immediately. If someone had been calling her regularly, threatening her or controlling her movements, there would be a trail. But when the records came back, they showed something unexpected. "All the calls came from the same number," Elena reported. "A landline registered to Desert Winds RV Park." Sarah stared at the phone records. "Someone at the park was calling her? But who? And why?" Detective Santos felt the pieces of the puzzle beginning to shift into a new pattern. Frank Morrison said he didn't call her. But there are other employees, other people with access to the park's phone system. The investigation was about to take a turn that would reveal Desert Winds RV Park wasn't the peaceful retirement community it appeared to be. Someone at the park had been controlling Margaret Chen's movements for 8 years, keeping her alive but isolated, forcing her to return again and again to the place where her nightmare had begun. But the most chilling discovery was yet to come. Because when Detective Santos pulled the employment records for Desert Winds RV Park, she found a name that would connect Harold Chen's death, Margaret's captivity, and the impossible GPS data in a way that defied everything they thought they knew about this case. The name belonged to someone who had been working at the park for over 20 years. Someone who had access to every RV, every visitor, every piece of personal information that guests provided when they registered. Someone who, according to the records, had been on duty the night Harold and Margaret Chen disappeared. The name on the employment record was David Keller, night security guard at Desert Winds RV Park for 23 years. According to his file, he had been the only employee on duty the night Harold and Margaret Chen disappeared. But what made Detective Santos's blood run cold was a note in his personnel file from 2015. Employee counseled for inappropriate interest in female guests. "We need to talk to this David Keller immediately," Santos told Elena. But when they called the park, Frank Morrison delivered disturbing news. "Dave? He stopped showing up for work about 8 months ago. Just disappeared one day, never came back for his final paycheck. I tried calling him, but his phone was disconnected. 8 months ago, the same time Margaret Chen's GPS tracker had gone silent." Sarah felt the pieces clicking together in her mind with horrible clarity. He was controlling her. For 8 years, he was making her come back to that park, probably threatening to hurt her if she didn't comply. Detective Santos was already running David Keller's background. What she found painted a picture of a man with a dangerous obsession with control and a history of targeting vulnerable women. David Keller, 58, had worked security jobs at various retirement communities and RV parks throughout Arizona and Nevada. His employment history showed a pattern of short-term positions ending abruptly, often with notes about boundary issues or inappropriate conduct with residents. But it was his criminal record that revealed the true scope of his pathology. 3 arrests for stalking between 1995 and 2008, all involving elderly women who lived alone. No convictions. His victims had been too frightened to testify, or had moved away before trials could begin. "He has a type," Elena observed, studying the police reports. "Elderly women, recently widowed or traveling alone, people who wouldn't immediately be missed if something happened to them." Detective Santos felt sick as she realized the implications. Harold and Margaret weren't his first victims, and they probably weren't his last. A database search revealed 15 missing persons cases over the past 20 years. All involving elderly couples or single women who had disappeared from RV parks where David Keller had been employed. The cases spanned multiple states, multiple jurisdictions, which explained why the pattern had never been detected. David Keller's last known address was a single-wide trailer in a run-down mobile home park on the outskirts of Phoenix. When Detective Santos and her team arrived with a search warrant, they found the trailer abandoned but filled with evidence that would make this case one of the most disturbing in Arizona history. The living room walls were covered with photographs, dozens of elderly couples and single women, all taken from a distance with a telephoto lens. Some photos were taken at RV parks, others at gas stations, restaurants, tourist attractions. All featured people who looked vulnerable, isolated, trusting. But it was the bedroom that revealed the true scope of Keller's crimes. A large map of the southwestern United States was pinned to the wall, marked with red pins at various locations. Each pin was labeled with names and dates. Harold and Margaret Chen's names appeared twice, once at Desert Winds RV Park on October 15, 2013, and again at the construction site coordinates with the date March 15, 2024. Among Keller's possessions, investigators found Margaret Chen's purse, containing her identification, credit cards, and a small notebook filled with her handwriting. The entries were brief but heartbreaking, documenting 8 years of captivity and fear. October 15, 2014. He made me go back to the park again. Sarah was there, just like every year. I wanted to run to her, but he said he'd hurt her if I tried. I have to stay strong. June 3, 2017. I keep asking him why he's keeping me alive. He says I'm useful. I think he uses me as bait to find other victims. God forgive me for what I've been forced to help him do. March 10th, 2024. I'm getting sick. He knows it too. I think my time is almost up. If anyone finds this, please tell Sarah I never stopped thinking about her. I tried to protect her the only way I could. Sarah read her mother's words through tears, finally understanding the impossible choice Margaret had faced. She had sacrificed her own freedom to protect her daughter, enduring 8 years of captivity to keep a monster from targeting the one person she loved most. The manhunt for David Keller intensified when investigators realized they weren't just looking for a kidnapper. They were hunting a serial killer who had been operating across multiple states for over 2 decades. His trailer contained personal items belonging to at least 12 different missing persons, creating a timeline of violence that stretched back to the 1990s. The break came when a truck stop security camera in New Mexico captured footage of Keller's vehicle just 3 days earlier. He was heading south toward the Mexican border, probably planning to disappear permanently. But David Keller had made one crucial mistake. He had kept Margaret Chen's cell phone, probably as a trophy. And that phone was still transmitting its location to cell towers along the interstate. When the FBI tactical team surrounded his vehicle at a rest stop outside El Paso, Texas, Keller surrendered without resistance. He was a broken man, aged beyond his years, mumbling incoherently about the voices in the desert and keeping them safe from the world. In custody, David Keller's confession revealed the full scope of his crimes. He had been targeting elderly travelers for over 20 years, using his positions at various RV parks to identify vulnerable victims. Harold Chen's death had been accidental, a heart attack brought on by terror when Keller had attempted to kidnap both Margaret and him. But instead of abandoning his plan, Keller had seen an opportunity. He kept Margaret alive, using her as both a psychological experiment and as bait to identify other potential victims. The regular visits to Desert Winds weren't just torture. They were reconnaissance missions where Margaret was forced to observe and report on other vulnerable guests. He turned her into an unwilling accomplice, Detective Santos explained to Sarah. For 8 years, she helped him identify victims because he threatened to hurt you if she refused. The case of Harold and Margaret Chen was finally closed, but it had opened investigations into dozens of other missing persons cases across the Southwest. David Keller would spend the rest of his life in prison, but for Sarah, justice felt hollow compared to the weight of 8 years of lost time with her mother. 6 months after David Keller's conviction, Sarah Chen stood at the construction site where her father's wedding ring had first emerged from the Arizona soil. The developer had agreed to create a small memorial garden where Harold and Margaret's remains had been found. Sarah knelt and placed 2 white roses on the freshly planted desert sage. "I understand now, Mom," she whispered. "You protected me the only way you could." Detective Santos watched from a respectful distance. The case had changed her understanding of how far a parent would go to protect their child. Margaret Chen had endured 8 years of captivity to keep her daughter safe from a monster. David Keller was sentenced to life without parole for 17 counts of murder. His confession had solved missing persons cases dating back to 1995, bringing closure to families across 6 states. The most haunting revelation was in Margaret's final diary entry. March 14th, 2024. Tomorrow he says it ends. I'm not afraid anymore. Harold is waiting for me. Sarah is safe. That's all that matters. The entry revealed that Margaret had known her death was approaching. In her final months, she had found peace, knowing that her sacrifice had protected her daughter for 8 crucial years. Desert Winds RV Park closed permanently 3 months later. The site where Harold and Margaret Chen had spent their last happy moments together was returned to the desert. Sarah had moved to Phoenix, where she now worked with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Persons, helping other families navigate the nightmare of vanished loved ones. Her experience had taught her that sometimes the greatest mysteries aren't about what happened, but about the impossible choices people make for love. On quiet evenings, she would drive out to the memorial garden, finally understanding that her parents' greatest gift wasn't the years they had lived, but the sacrifice that had kept her safe when darkness threatened to consume their family. The case was closed, but their story would live on in every family reunited, every mystery solved, every person brought home safe because of lessons learned from one construction worker's accidental discovery in the Arizona desert.